I want to welcome y'all tonight to our first program for this programming season that runs September through May. We'll meet on the second Tuesday of every month here for the programming. I think the only difference in January, we're working on having a social. So there will be some information coming out on that. We are the Charlotte Wildlife Stewards, chapter of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, and we do most of our work in the Charlotte area. We have a website, and we also have an email. I encourage you, if you're not already on our mailing list, to go to our website and sign up there to get our newsletter once a month. Where's Jesse? Jesse does our newsletter. We're also on Facebook and Instagram, so those are places to follow us and see what we are up to. Our mission, we're all about conservation for wildlife and habitat. So what we want to do is create, protect, and preserve wildlife habitat through education, like tonight, engagement, which are some of our volunteer opportunities, and enjoyment, which are some of the fun things we do. And even some of our volunteer projects they are a lot of fun, and that's a great way to get to know other folks that are interested in wildlife and conservation. We find our tribe that way. So what can we do on our own to support wildlife? Well, that is creating wildlife habitat in our own yards, and it can be anywhere from acres to a patio or a balcony. You can, as long as you can provide the elements of food, water, shelter, and places for them to nest, then you can certify with the National Wildlife Federation as a wildlife habitat. We have over 1,600 in Charlotte right now, which is pretty cool. And Charlotte is certified as a wildlife community, which I think is pretty remarkable. And more and more folks are getting on board with that. We have a great relationship going with landscape management with the city, and they are focusing more on things like natives and habitat. So it's growing, and hopefully it will keep growing. North Carolina Wildlife Federation has the Butterfly Highway program, which involves creating pollinator habitat on your property. And that's something, if you go to their website, just click on their Butterfly Highway link, and it will give you all the information there that you need. So we didn't have our programs over the summer, but we were busy with some planning. We did have a few things going on. In June, we had our fundraiser, which was Wild on the Water. Some of y'all participated in that. It was a beautiful day again. I don't know why that keeps happening, but we love it when it does. So that was a lot of fun. Here we were at the Innovation Barn we were talking about pollination and showing the different parts of the plants that are involved in pollination. Had some visitors there. If you haven't been to the Innovation Barn, I highly recommend you check it out. It's downtown on Siegel Avenue, and it's a really cool place. They're doing really innovative work there. And then the other thing is we've had 2 moth nights this summer. We had such a long waiting list, we scheduled a second one, and then we even had a waiting list for that one because it's so much fun. So those are some things that's one of the enjoyment things that we do. So we love our volunteers. Some of you in the room I know are stellar volunteers. Some have been with us at 1 or more events, and we love it when y'all come out and help us because we can't do everything on our own. We have partnered with Keep Charlotte Beautiful, and we do 3 cleanups on Tyvola Road. Each year we've got one coming up in October. We have Kids in Nature Day coming up, and I'll talk more about that in a little bit. And we do invasive removals and garden planting. We'll have a couple pollinator gardens that we'll be putting in probably in late October or November. We're going to need some volunteers to help us with that. So there will be more information coming out on that, through our social media and also through our newsletter. One thing I do have for Kids in, well, I'll just put this out there right now. For Kids in Nature Day, we partner with different other conservation organizations in town, and they have hands-on activities for the kids. Well, we need volunteers to assist them. And it's a lot of fun. You get to see these kids just having so much fun, and families too. I mean, the adults sometimes are having as much fun as the kids. And there's a little sign on the back table that actually has a little QR code that if you would like to volunteer, you can pull that up for the sign up to see where we need folks and sign up for that. It is October 6th. Here it is right here, Kids in Nature Day. It's Sunday, October 6th. It's from 2 to 5 p.m. We do it on Sunday because everybody's busy on Saturday with sports. So on Sunday afternoon, you're like, what am I going to do with the kids? So anyway, so we do it then. It'll be at Reedy Creek Park, which is over in East Charlotte. They are so happy that we're doing Kids in Nature Day there. They're very welcoming to us. So we will have some live animals. We'll have, see here, a turtle. These folks bring their snakes, who are very much snake ambassadors. I mean, they're handled by kids all the time. They're really cool. Should have some frogs and amphibians there this year. It's going to be a really, really fun day again. Raptor Center will be there. Ranger Rick will be there. Ranger Rick will be there. Yeah. So some other things that are coming up. So Charlotte has a monarch celebration. Before COVID, there was Monarch Festival, and then COVID kind of put a kibosh on that sort of thing. Anyway, last year was our first one, so we're doing it again as a collaboration with conservation groups in town, and we'll be celebrating the monarch butterfly along with pollinators, just in general. We'll have an active hands-on activity there. We've had some plants donated, and also we've purchased some for Reedy Creek Nature Center, and we're going to be inviting participants to actually help plant them in their garden. That's one of the activities that will be there. We'll also have 2 speakers talking about butterflies and other pollinators. So I encourage you to come on out there, whether you have kids or not. Fun day, fun time. And that is on September 28th. That is on a Saturday morning. And then we have our first Tybola Road cleanup of this year is October 19th. And that's a Sunday morning, is that right? I think that's a Sunday morning. From 10 to 12, we meet at the Panera there right off Tybola Road and work out from there. So this is in collaboration with Keep Charlotte Beautiful. And we will have all the supplies. You just have to show up. Oops, where else? Oh, and then on November 23rd, we'll be partnering with Stormwater to do creek relief. And what that is replanting or planting trees along some creeks. And this will be along the Stewart Creek Greenway. And we don't have the sign up for that yet, but we will be getting that out soon. But that's November 23rd. So that's a good opportunity to come out and do some good community work. So, and then we've got, for October, November, our upcoming programs are going to be really cool. So Sonny Cooper, who is the manager of the Carolina Raptor Center, will be doing a presentation on raptor rehabilitation. So we've had the Raptor Center do some presentations on specific types of birds before, but she's going to talk about actually what they do at the hospital. So I think that's really interesting to a lot of people. And this is Sunny in that picture she's releasing. Looks like an owl. And then November, our program is on wetlands and amphibians. So Kira McIntyre is a professor at Queens, and she is an amphibian specialist. But I asked her if she could talk about wetlands. You know, there's stuff going on where we're losing wetland protections, and people don't really understand how important they are, not just to wildlife, but to floodwater mitigation and to oxygen production and all that sort of thing. So she will be talking to us about that. And what you came here tonight for, Dr. Steve Fields is going to talk to us about mammals in the Piedmont. And Alden, you're going to come and help me switch this over.
Yeah.
And he's going to introduce.
So thanks for coming out today, everybody. My name is Alden Picard. I'm a conservation coordinator for the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, so I am a staff member. I am paid to be here. I got technically though, volunteer, paid activism. Anyhow, I'm in it for the wildlife, right? And so you might have gotten an email from me. So thank you. Thanks for registering for this program. So real quick, first, I met Dr. Fields. I'm a student in the Central Carolina's Master Naturalist program this year. And I met Dr. Fields giving one of our classes. And he's a wonderful naturalist and a great guy and a great presenter. So I asked if he would be interested in speaking on mammals because that is his area of expertise, right, Dr. Fields? So he is the curator of natural history for the Cultural and Heritage Museums of York County, where he's been there since 1986. Has anyone ever been down there? The Museum of York County? Okay, we got one. We got one. It's not that far. It's not that far. I haven't been there yet either, so. But I'm going in a couple weeks. He's also an adjunct instructor for the biology department at Winthrop University since 1997, and York Technical College. So he's taught online courses there since 2013. So Dr. Fields earned his Bachelor of Science and Master's of Science degrees in biology from Winthrop University and a PhD in integrated biology from the University of South Carolina. Go Gamecocks. Anybody? Here we go. We're getting, we're awake, we're alive. It's Tuesday. He's published papers. He's published papers in several scientific journals on natural history and fossils of the southeastern United States. His first book, In Your Nature, The Ponderings of a Carolina Piedmont Naturalist, is a compilation of nature articles that he wrote for York County Magazine from 2006 to 2016. So we are raffling off a copy of his book, and he is here also selling his book. So after the presentation, he will sell you his book and autograph it. All the proceeds go to support the work of the Museum of York County or the Heritage and Cultural Museum. He can explain it a little better. So I want to welcome Dr. Fields. Thank you. Thank you for coming out. Yeah, and if you want to show off your book a little bit while I switch over.
Let me do a quick commercial.
Yeah.
So as Alvin said, this is a book that's I wrote natural history essays for York County or YC Magazine, actually for more than 10 years. But for the first 10 years, we did it on monthly, and they invited me to do it because they wanted somebody who did nature because they didn't have anything about nature in there. So I did articles for them every month, some aspect of natural history or nature in York County, or specifically the Piedmont. And so after 10 years of writing, we got the idea to compile these into a book that we could sell at the museum, and the museum could make money off of it. So that's what this is. And as Alvin said, one of these will be raffled off. So if somebody can be walking out here with one of these free, the rest of you, if you want one, you have to fork up $17. I say that the $17 is actually for my signature. The book is free, but just kidding, of course. And as he said, all the proceeds do go to the Museum of York County and Cultural Heritage Museum. I'm not getting anything from this except kudos. But anyway, I'll be available to take advantage of that after our program. Yeah, I've been with the museum for 38 years now. It's hard to believe. I've taught at the university for 26, and it's amazing to me. It's been a wild ride, but it's been a lot of fun, and I truly feel blessed. I'm one of those people who doesn't dread getting up and going to work in the morning because I really love what I do, and I always have. And getting to share with other people my passion for the natural world, and especially this part of the state we call the Piedmont, this middle portion of the state, in North and South Carolina. And in fact, that is the mission of our museum, to communicate and conserve the natural history of the Carolina Piedmont, because it's an area that's been grossly understudied and overlooked for decades. It seems like the early explorers, they would come into Charleston and want to explore the coastal plain, then they want to go right up to the mountains come right through the Piedmont and completely overlook everything here just to get to the mountains. And so we're excited to be able to present tonight the mammals. Now, what you're seeing here is basically a compilation of 12 years of research that I did, and ultimately it was published in one of the scientific journals called Southeastern Naturalist back in 2007. But the work actually continues.
And then you should be able to go.
There we go. All right, so not that I was specifically overlooking North Carolina by any means, but honestly, it's been my experience and my observation that North Carolina has done a much better job at documenting and preserving natural history of the entire state, not just Piedmont. And I've known a lot of people up at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences in Raleigh. They've got it going on, so they're doing really good. It's not really the same in South Carolina. There's just not that much that's gone on really worth talking about. And I'm a little bit ashamed to say that, but hopefully part of this work that I've been doing and some of my colleagues have been doing are bringing more attention to the Piedmont. So in South Carolina, you see there's a couple of bold lines there, and then this area we've got shaded. That comprises the Piedmont portion of South Carolina. In fact, we just have a very small amount of the Blue Ridge Mountains, the Appalachian Mountains coming through the state there. And then of course, everything below that is below the fall line going in the coastal plain. So when I decided to do this research, I focused on 6 counties of the north central Piedmont, including York County, where I've lived my entire life, and then these adjacent counties. So virtually anything I'm presenting here, as far as the findings, would be certainly valid for Mecklenburg County as well. You know, we're the only mammals that respect political boundaries. Okay, so squirrels aren't going to get to the state line and go, oh, I can't go any farther. You know, so anyway. So as I said, I love that word paucity. It just means not much of anything. And so there's a Piedmont paucity of a lot of information about natural history, but the mammals have been no exception to that. Now, you know, as part of the scientific method, when we start to do something, you know, we want to see if anything else has been done. So we do a literature search. And I found some papers. You know, I found this guy, Robert Coleman, who worked at this Charleston Museum, I believe is where it was. But most of his work was on the coastal plain. There was a book written called South Carolina Mammals, but it's as old as I am. It was published in the year that I was born, 1966. So there hasn't been a comprehensive book about the mammals of South Carolina in 58 years. And even that wasn't that great at doing the identifications, because what Frank Golly did, and he featured in here, were these dot maps of different counties in the state. And for each species, he wrote a little account, but he put these maps. And so if you see a dark circle, that means that that species was found in the county and it's backed up by a specimen in a museum. And if it's an open circle, it's backed up by a literature citation of that. And so, you know, just to tell you how badly things have been officially documented, you might not be able to see where you're sitting what these two things represent here. So this first one right here, this is showing you as of 1966, the official distribution of Stewards carolinensis. Does anybody know what Stewards carolinensis is? The gray squirrel. So according to Frank Golly's map in 1966, this was the official distribution of the gray squirrel in South Carolina. This one back here is equally amusing. That is, now what they called it back then was Didelphis marsupialis. Today the official name is Didelphis virginiana. You might know what that is. Possum. Possum. And so, yeah. So you tell me, is it not important to get some updated records and work? And the thing is, people would say, well, we know there's possums and squirrels, and we know that this animal lives. But see, that's one thing to know it and pass it on generationally. It's another thing to have an official documented or published record of something. And you say, well, why is that important? It's very important because, as you guys know, planet-wide, we are losing species at an alarming rate as a direct result of our impact. How sad would it be for something to go extinct that we didn't officially know about in the first place? And I'm sure that's happening because, you know, they still discover new species around the globe. And they aren't all tiny things. So what has been published, and some of these things are helpful. Well, in these papers here, and some of these guys studied the Western Piedmont. Let's see, what was it? David Webster at UNC Wilmington and his colleagues, they published a book in 1985 that's on the mammals of the Carolinas, Virginia, and Maryland, but they show these range maps. They don't show specific occurrences. And I'm sure you've seen range maps before. Do you know how they construct range maps for field guides and stuff like that? They take known records and draw dots, and then they just connect the dots and shade in. And that's the range for that animal. That's how all range maps are done. This was the same thing for the southeastern United States, Brown 1997, I believe it was. So yeah, okay, this is the range, but that, you know, people look at that and say, oh, these things are all over the place. No, they're not. They're sporadic occurrence a lot of times. And then you say, well, what about the museums that are keeping specimens? You know, and there are museums that do that. My museum does that. Not just things that you put on exhibit, but things that are kept in cabinets for research, study skins and skulls and skeletal material. And these days, tissue sample for DNA analysis and things like that. So I did this extensive search of museums across the country. So in the Carolinas, you know, Clemson University actually has a really good collection of not just mammals, but all vertebrates. But most of that collection has come from the mountains in the western part of the state. The Charleston Museum also has an incredible collection going all the way back to the 1700s. The Charleston Museum was actually an official museum before the United States was the official country. So they've been going at it for a while. But again, most of their specimens came from the coastal plain. Piedmont is lacking. And so I started finding, and fortunately I was doing this in the early 2000s when, you know, the internet was finally coming into its own and you could do online searches. So I was actually finding specimens from the Carolinas at the American Museum of Natural History, the Carnegie Museum, the Field Museum, and of course our own museum. But they weren't that common to find them there. Then there are some places that have unpublished records, maybe technical reports from people had done some things. The National Park Service back in the early 2000s instituted this grand scheme to try to do biotic surveys of the national parks. And they would invite experts to come in and survey their parks for all these different, the amphibians, the reptiles, the fish, the plants. And they actually hired me to come and do the mammal survey at Kings Mountain National Park. And I did that in the early 2000s. The Department of Natural Resources, South Carolina, and I'm sure the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Department too. They're going to keep records because in the olden days, there were a lot more like fur trappers. And so every time somebody trapped an animal as a fur bearer, they had to have a record of it at the state. So that's actually how I got some of my data on the fur bearers. And like I said, I did the Kings Mountain National Park study, and that was actually published in 2007. I did that with the North Carolina Journal of North Carolina Academy of Sciences with that one. The only other way to figure out what you got in an area is to get out and look. And I mean, how many species of mammals do you guys see outside on a regular basis? Now, I'm not talking about dogs and cats and domesticated. I'm talking about wild, native mammal species. How many do you see outside on a regular basis, just in everyday life? What do you see? You see white-tailed deer, what? Deer and gray squirrels. There are some chipmunks in certain areas. Occasionally you'll see fox, raccoons, possums, things like that. How many of those do you see in the daytime? What if I told you that in York County, so probably in Mecklenburg County, there are 50 different species of mammals? That's because, and the reason you don't know about them is because most of them are nocturnal. They're active at night. And that goes way, way back in their history. A lot of people think that mammals didn't show up on Earth till after the dinosaurs went extinct. That's not true. Mammals and dinosaurs showed up at about the same time. It's just that the conditions were more favorable to the dinosaurs than they were to the mammals. So the mammals had to take a back seat for a while the dinosaurs and their relatives dominated the air, the land, and the seas. But once the dinosaurs were out of the way, the mammals then began to flourish and fill all these available niches. But they had all that time during the reign of the dinosaurs to occupy a niche that most of the dinosaurs were not, which was being active at night. So they got all these specialized adaptations for being nocturnal. And that's why most of the mammals you still see today are nocturnal. So when you want to go out and figure out what's out there, you got to do things where you're going to get the nocturnal ones. And one of the most common ways we do this is by live trapping. And what you're looking at here are 3 different sizes of what are called Sherman live traps. And I jokingly tell people I've done this for 30 years. I've never caught a single Sherman. But obviously that's named after the person. But these they're simple aluminum boxes, and you notice they have hinges on them. They're really cool because they fold down and you can store them a lot easier. All this is a very simple mechanism. You put the front door down, it locks into place. It has a little treadle. You put some bait in the back of it, and a little mammal crawls in there, steps on the treadle, and the door closes behind it. That's it. And you put these out in the evening, and you check them first thing in the morning at sunrise. So that way, your animal is not being left in there for a long period of time. They've got food. And what you can also do is put a, if it's cool, you can actually put a piece of cotton batting in there so rodents will actually make a little bed in there. So as a result, you're not having a lot of trap mortality when you go check these things in the morning. Now, sometimes you do get mortality. Sometimes it's just too stressful for the animals. But there's 3 different sizes there. That biggest one, to give you an indication, would be big enough to trap a squirrel, a gray squirrel. But squirrels are way too smart to go in those things. I've never caught a squirrel in a Sherman trap. But I have caught lots of different species of rats and mice and even shrews like that. The reason you see that little orange pin flag there is when you do this, you're putting out dozens of these at a time. And you think when you're putting them out, you're going to say, oh, I remember where that is. I remember where that is. But if you put out 144 traps, even if it's in a grid pattern, you know, sometimes you go out the next day and the trap's gone. You know, maybe a predator has hauled it off or a raccoon has taken it. I've come to them and sometimes, and that front door literally be ripped open and the aluminum's like this. So my only thought is, okay, a raccoon or something wanted whatever was in there. And if people see them, you know, they're going to do crazy things with them too. Pitfall traps are another cool way. And so what you see here is you could take something as small as a coffee can, dig a hole and bury it. But these things are much more effective if you put some kind of what's called a drift fence. And if you have a fallen log, that's even better. Otherwise, you erect this little fence, because what happens is, you know, these creatures are creatures of habit. And they usually follow the same pathways every night when they're going out foraging. Well, if you put like some kind of barrier, they're going to come to that and they're going to go to that barrier, and they're going to go to the left, they're going to go to the right. And if you have a pitfall in place, they'll go, because they weren't expecting a hole there from the night before. So they'll go fall right in there. And so you go in there again the next morning and you check them. Now in the old days, when museums were only interested in killing things to put them in specimens, they could leave these things for days on end, fill them with antifreeze or some kind of preservative, and just let the animals fall in there, drown, die, and they'd automatically be preserved. But that's not humane. And I've never done anything like that. I go check these, you know, and get the animals out as quickly as I can, do whatever I'm going to document them, photograph them, whatever, and move on. And so 5-gallon pitfalls are actually pretty good because mice can jump out of a lot of these things pretty easily. So this is it's sad that this happened, but it's actually been beneficial to document some species diversity. There were actually 2 papers published decades ago about what they call discarded bottle surveys. And just by fact of people throwing things on the sides of the road or out in the woods on trails, especially bottles, little rodents, especially shrews, would like go in there. And either they couldn't get back out or they didn't get back out. I know what happened a lot of times. I used to find a lot of shrew skeletons in discarded beer bottles. Because you know, when you got a little bit of beer in there and you got an animal that's this big, goes in there, I mean, they can get drunk off of whatever's in there, and then may not be able to get their way back out, and then they die, and you know, get that's actually a dead shrew that came out of a beer bottle right there. And sometimes they're there so long that they skeletonize. But the good thing about mammals is if you got their skull, you can tell what they are, because the teeth and the skulls are very diagnostic on most mammals. Sometimes you don't have to see the mammal, you just have to see that they've been there. Now, this was far more common in the days before we had game trail cameras. And of course, nowadays it got digital ones. But what they used to do, and I've done some of this too, is clear out a space in the woods and put down some either very fine sand or ground up lime like you would throw in your garden, so that the animals would come behind and they leave their footprints behind. And mammal footprints are pretty easy to diagnose usually, but you have to put something to lure them in. And this is especially effective with the nocturnal carnivores like foxes and bobcats, weasels, and things like that. And so you could get little cans of potted meat, but then I figured out, I don't think a lot of humans are going to eat this. Why would any self-respecting nocturnal mammal eat this stuff? But some of them do. And then I found out about this company out in Idaho that sold stuff to wildlife companies or wildlife departments who want to do these kind of surveys. They took a little plastic disc and impregnated it with a very foul-smelling chemical, and which apparently was very attractive to carnivores. Now, all I can say is when I opened the can of these things, to me, it smelled like, pardon my expression, vomit that had gone rancid. That's what it smelled like to me. Butyric acid, which is the main component in that stuff, by the way. But apparently the carnivores absolutely love it, because I would go to these sites and find these footprints. The disc is gone. They've taken it. They've eaten the plaster or whatever. I don't know, but just absolutely horrible. So what you're looking at there are some bobcat tracks from Kings Mountain. And then you get people who try to have a sense of humor. When I was doing the survey at Kings Mountain, I had one of the technicians work up there with me, Chris McNeely. I love this guy. He was just this wonderful, red-blooded, red-headed Irish guy that just, I mean, he was just really wonderful to work with. And he was always doing stuff like this. And so he sent me pictures every day of the stuff he would find it on the tracks. And then he would say, what species is this? What species is this? And I looked at that one. I said, I think we have a very rare one here. This is the red-headed smart aleck right here. And so we would also use some remote trip cameras. The ones I used, though, it was before the digital ones came in vogue. So you actually had little rolls of film in them. And it was funny, some of the stuff we'd get. I mean, obviously you get your standard deer, which is great to document. But I also got things like cattle that had gotten loose from the adjacent farm and crossed Kings Creek there. And so they're tripping the remote trip cameras. And then there's the old red-headed smart aleck himself tripping one of the cameras too. So I said, yeah, I got a verification on that ID. So we know that species is still active at Kings Mountain. And then there are the bats. The bats were something that held a very strong interest for me. In fact, I thought I wanted to build my PhD around bat studies. But then I figured out something very important when it came to studying bats. They are very nocturnal, and even more so, I am not. And so being out until all hours of the morning doing bat research really wasn't my cup of tea. But still, in the early 2000s, I was intrigued enough to go join a group of bat biologists out in Arkansas, the Southeastern Bat Diversity Network, which is still in operation today. Because me as a newbie, I wanted to learn how to mist net and get, I got my permits for mist netting. I got my rabies shots, all that stuff ahead of time. And we went out with these groups in Arkansas, and we started setting up mist nets. And so mist nets are kind of cool. It's the same nets that people who trap birds, people who get birds and band them, those very fine hairnet-like mist nets, they're called. You use the same thing to get bats. And people say, well, can bats really not perceive those with their echolocation? And we think they probably can, because I would see some bats fly right towards the net and go right up over it and keep going. So they know there's a barrier there. But the thinking is that sometimes, like I said, these animals are creatures of habit. A bat that's gone back and forth across a feeding corridor every night sees something new there and maybe perceives it as something like a spider web that they can fly right through because they've done that before. And because it's not a spider web, they hit the net and they get tangled. Well, the thing is, you got to watch these nets and you got to get to that bat very quickly because they'll chew their way out of the net very easily. And these nets are not cheap and they're a pain to try to fix. So I remember, this is the picture the first night I was out there with these guys working. This is a red bat and it hit the net. And I'm like, oh guys, there's one in the net. They're like, okay, go get it. And I'm like, I've never done that before. They said, it's no big deal, go get it. And I was a little apprehensive. And I said, okay. And so I had done all this research and reading. I started putting on these gloves, like baseball gloves, that still had a little bit of dexterity. And they're like, what are you doing? I said, I don't want to get bitten. They said, you've got your shots, right? I said, yeah. They said, get the bat out of the net. So I took the gloves off. And I had also read about some people that would take crochet hooks. And so I got my crochet hooks out of the field bag and started to walk over there. And they're like, what is that? What are you doing? I said, they said, put those down and get the bat out of the net. I'm like, well, he might bite me. Have you had your shots, right? Yes, get the bat out of the net. So, finally I got over there and started working with the bat and got him out of the net. But yes, he did. Yes, he did. And the sad but funny part is, every time we'd get these bats out of the net, there would be 5 or 6 biologists. Some of them wanted blood samples, some of them wanted this, some of them wanted that. So we'd process these guys within 5 or 10 minutes and then release them. That bat died in the middle of us processing. Sometimes apparently the stress of being caught is just too much for them. It's not common, but it does happen. And I felt so bad that it was on my watch. And somebody said, well, maybe the bat didn't have his shots. He bit you and he died from it. And I'm like, well, okay, that's a little bit funny, but not really. So doing that, what kind of effort did we put into this survey? And I say we because I'm not the only one that did it. The survey itself went primarily from 1994 to 2005. And so we logged 9,338 trap nights. Now that doesn't mean, that's a little misleading. That doesn't mean we did 9,338 nights of trapping. A trap night is a trap per night. So if I set out 20 traps in one night, that's 20 trap nights. If I set out 1 trap a night for 20 nights, that's still 20 trap nights. So overall, that's still a good survey effort. So over 9,000 trap nights, over 570 person hours involved. And in that, of all the stuff we did, I got 259 captures. And you look at that, that's 2.77 success trapping. That's pretty low. That's actually pretty common. Anything up to 5% is considered very good trap success. So most of this kind of work is not very productive, but if you keep at it long enough and do it with a long duration, you're going to get results. And as you can see, that was my second attempt at getting a red bat, and that one didn't bite me. But we did show him, and he didn't die. So we did all the stuff we needed to do with it and released it. So what were the results of this? In this particular survey, we got 43 species of mammals from those 6 counties in the north central Piedmont, South Carolina, representing 7 mammal orders and 16 families. And we had 100 voucher specimens that were deposited into the museum where I work. Most of these were deaths of rodents, because in addition to doing the stuff where I was actively collecting, every time somebody would find something dead on the road or whatever, they would notify me of it. And I would go document it. And in some cases, I would collect it, because that makes a good museum specimen if they're relatively fresh. Things that have been hit and died on the road. So, what exactly did we find? I'm going to go through the orders of mammals here. All right, here's the possum. So this might be the first official record of the Virginia possum in York County, South Carolina, because Frank Golly's 1996 or 1966 book didn't have it. But this apparently is, sadly, appears to be the natural habitat of the Virginia possum. This guy gets hit on the side of the road probably more than any other animal. But again, they spent all this time here long before there were humans and automobiles, so they're still adapting to that. So, but roadkill is a good way to document species. But what's interesting about this is I got 15 minutes of fame by doing this mammal research in the late 90s and early 2000s. Because this was the headline that made it on the local paper one day after a guy came and interviewed me. For research, he hits the road just after animals do. Now, this part of the research I was actually working on my master's degree at that point, not my PhD. And so the then curator at the museum thought it would be good to have the local paper do a story on me, because this is the first official research of mammals that went on in York County, South Carolina. So the guy comes out, he talked to me an hour and a half, and was asking me about all the different things. And I said something about getting the roadkill, and he said, "What?" I said, "Yeah." I said, we document roadkill, and I said, and if they're in good condition enough, we'll get them and keep them to make specimens out of them. He said, "Where do you put them?" Until you get, I said, "I got a freezer," and it was in my office. I said, "It's a big chest freezer right over here." He said, "Do you mean that's full of dead roadkill right now?" And I said, "Yeah." "Can I see it?" "Sure, I don't care." Open it up, and possums and raccoons and foxes, stuff that you're not going to get otherwise. I made a joke. I said, if you find it dead on the road, you're not going to find it in a trap, right? And he wrote that in there too. But that was what got acknowledged, not me doing all this extensive 9,000 night trap nights and all this bat research. Picking up roadkill, that was the hook. And it would have been fine if that had just been, okay, that made the local paper, no big deal. This went national, guys. This got on the Associated Press wire. And again, this was the late 90s. The internet wasn't really going yet. But it got on the Associated Press, and it went all across the country. By the end of the next day, I had papers calling me from San Francisco, Chicago, New York City. A couple of them wanted to have me do a live call-in with them to the public because here's the hook. This Southern guy is picking up roadkill down there in the state, in South Carolina. And almost every single one of them asked me the same question. Have you eaten any of it? And I had to say, of course, no, I haven't. But I was trying to say, God, we're doing research stuff. I don't want to hear any of that. This Southern guy's picking up road. You mean you get paid to do that? That's what you do for a living? No, I do this and this. I'm a curator, but that was the angle. So that was my 15 minutes of fame, coast to coast, notoriety for picking up dead animals on the side of the road. I guess you take what you can get. So, a little less known group, these are the insectivores, moles and shrews. And a lot of people don't see these guys. You see the evidence of them, the hills that they do. And a lot of people say, oh, I got to get rid of the moles. They're eating my flower bulbs. Da, 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 da. No, they're not. Moles are not plant eaters. Voles are plant eaters. Now, voles are little rodents, little mice. But moles are insectivores. They love earthworms, things like that. They're not really going to be a problem. Now, digging around under your lawn, yeah, in your garden, that might present a problem for you. But they're not eating your flower bulbs. And they're close relatives to shrews. Most shrews are not much bigger than your thumb. They're the smallest mammals. We have 3 species around here. And again, you're rarely going to find them above ground, or a lot of times they're under cover. But these guys have a really high metabolism. They pretty much eat their entire body weight every night. That's how voracious they are. And I have had bad situations where I'd have more than one shrew fall in a pitfall trap at night. And when I got there the next day, there's one shrew running around pretty happy. The other one's half eaten. Cannibalism. So yeah, they're pretty voracious. And I'm literally, half of the shrew is gone because the other one has pretty much eaten it. The bats around here, we documented, I believe it was, 8 species there? And the thing I wanted to do as far as research was, we got 8 species of bats. They're all eating the same thing. They're insectivores. They're aerial insectivores, meaning they're catching bugs on the wing. What you got to realize is globally, bats serve a lot of different purposes. There are certain bats in certain countries that can actually go down and grab fish out of the water. They're fishing bats. They echolocate through water. Some are attuned to the vocalizations of toads and frogs. They'll swoop down and catch frogs and toads. Some bats eat other bats in certain parts of the world. Of course, there are fruit bats. There are vampire bats that will cause little incisions and lap up blood from cattle and people in tropics occasionally. And some bats are very important pollinators in the tropics too. They get nectar and pollen from flowers at night. But here, they're all catching insects. So what I wanted to say was, if we got 8 species of bats, they're all eating the same thing, how are they not competing with each other? How are they not getting in each other's way? How are they partitioning the resources? So I wanted to do a research project around that. But then I started saying, well, like I said, I'm not hip on being out there in the middle of the night catching these things. But I had some cool hypotheses, like maybe some of them are going out at different times of the night. I mean, a bat doesn't go out when it gets dark and then come back in when it gets light. They go in shifts sometimes. Some of them are foraging at really high altitudes compared to others. Some of them are specializing at going after certain sized insects. Maybe they're able to differentiate. Some of them are what we would call gleaners. They're not catching things on the wing, but if there's insects on trees and structures where they can fly and snatch them away, like hawking behavior, they'll do that. But I wasn't able to collect data on any of that, to get it published. So pretty much remains undone, at least by me. But we do know we have all these different species of bats, and at least one of these is a federally endangered species, the Ori bat. So for 2 years, I worked with these guys out in Arkansas. Well, I don't mean not for 2 years straight. 1 year we were in Arkansas. The next year we were actually in central North Carolina working. But it was really kind of neat to because these are devoted bat biologists. This is all they do all the time. And they're an interesting lot of people. The mist net, as I said, you can't even hardly see it on this picture. There's a pole, there's a pole, there's a pole. And some of these nets are really, really high. You set these things up. And usually you do it over a waterway, because wherever there's water, there's going to be insects. Plus, if you've ever watched bats, that's how they drink. They fly over a body of water and skim the surface with their lower jaw and get water that way. That's how they'll get it. So we'd set up these traps and nets over waterways. And what this guy right here, he's not showing any kind of sign of victory or holding up his arms like that. What he's doing, he's holding the top of the mist net, so you really can't even see it in this picture. But that net goes from where he's holding it all the way down to the surface of the water. So, as I said earlier, what happens when something hits the net? Well, that happened to me right there. That's the famous bite that the first bite that I ever got from a red bat. And you can see they got two little pretty sharp canine teeth, just like a vampire on there. But the problem is, that's not the only thing that gets in these nets sometimes. We get huge moths, like sphinx moths and luna moths and things like that would hit these nets sometimes, get tangled up. And me being the kind of biologist I am, like I said, I'm fascinated by everything. But these bat biologists, oh, they're offended. There'd be a beautiful sphinx moth in that net. They'd go just crunch that moth up and pull it out of the net. I'm like, what are you doing? That's a beautiful sphinx moth. They're obviously just interested in bats. I'm like, to them, that moth, that was just bat food anyway. So yeah, they can be pretty interesting people to be around sometimes. Then there's this thing called a harp trap that's really kind of neat. Sometimes it's called a Tuttle trap because Merlin Tuttle, one of the famous bat biologists in North America, came up with this design that basically has a frame with two strands of fishing line, monofilament. You got one bank here and then one bank right behind it. And there's three things that can happen when a bat flies through that. Number one, it can hit that and bounce right back out again. Not successful. Number two, it can fly right through it. Or the intended effect is for the bat to hit the first bank in such a way that it breaks its flight momentum. It hits the second bank and slides down into that little pocket right there. Now, once a bat is down on the ground, it usually can't just take off again from a flat surface. They usually have to climb up a little something and get a little altitude and then take off from there. But on the inside of that pocket there, there's a lip that curls inward. So the bat would climb up there and it can't go any farther. And it would be stuck there until you got there and checked it out and did whatever you're going to do. And most of the time, these kind of traps would be set like at the entrance of a cave or a known roosting site where you know bats are going to be flying into it. But again, it's not designed to kill the bat or anything like that. It's just for you to be able to get the bat in hand and then do what you're going to do. Here are some of the research that these guys were doing out west. Here they're taking a blood sample, and every time you do this, when you're holding a bat, it's going to bite. It's going to want to bite something. So these guys had a glove, and you can see this is a brown bat, which is one of our biggest ones, and it's latched onto that glove finger while he's distracting it, getting its blood that way. So that's a pretty interesting way to distract them. You can assess their breeding condition because at the right time, certain things are, shall we say, pretty obvious. Assess condition that way. You can assess their age by, this is actually most effective at night. If you shine a light behind it, you can actually see the bones of the wing showing through the light. And just like all other mammals, until they are full-grown adults, the long bones haven't completely fused together. The end caps, or the epiphyses they're called, haven't fused together yet. So if you shine the light through there and see some little spaces between those long bones, you know that it hasn't become the adult stage yet. To measure their mass, you simply put them in a little bag and hold that on a scale. Just subtract the weight of the bag, and you've got their body mass. This was an interesting thing because back then people were just getting into DNA studies. So they would take a little biopsy tool and they would take a little alcohol swab, rub it across the bat's wing, and punch a little tiny hole out of the wing membrane, which grows right back. It's not something that debilitates the bat or keeps it from being able to fly, but it does grow right back again. The sound that the bats use, what people mistakenly call radar, is not true radar. It's best termed echolocation, for sending out a signal that bounces back, and they use their hearing to navigate by that. Bats are not blind. Bats have eyes and they can see just fine. It's just that their way of navigating is based more on sound than by vision, and that's how they operate. They can tell distance. They can tell the size of the prey, they can tell how fast the prey is going just by the echolocation. And this is happening many times a second. This echolocation is an ultra high frequency and it's bouncing back. So people learned pretty early on that if you could record and analyze the echolocation calls, most of them are species specific. You could actually, you don't even have to have the bat in hand. You take one of these anabat detectors out there, download the sounds and analyze them with the software, and you can tell the species of bats you have in an area and never even have to see them. That's become very popular. Now, this is actually pretty ancient technology here, what I'm showing you on the screen. This is 20 years old. Nowadays, they have very sophisticated anabat technology. If you go to a museum and they have a study collection, this is how they're going to look. The bats are either going to be in that collection with their wings folded, or sometimes at least one of the wings is extended so that they can be studied that way. Moving on to other groups. As far as I know, we only have one type of wild rabbit here, the eastern cottontail. There is such a thing as a marsh rabbit and a swamp rabbit, but neither one of those appear to be common, if at all present, in the Piedmont. They tend to be more common towards the coast, but everybody's seen these guys too. The rodents are by far the most common. There are over 6,000 species of mammals in the world today, known mammals in the world today, and over 2,200 of those are rodents. The rodents are by far the most common and speciose of all the mammals today. So what kind of mammals did we find here? Several types of squirrels, including chipmunks, woodchucks or groundhogs in certain areas, of course the gray squirrel, the fox squirrel, and the southern flying squirrel found here. In fact, this range map here, originally the range of Marmota monax, which is the woodchuck or ground squirrel, groundhog, some of the original range maps only had them here, but I've got them from York County. In fact, more than one. So that's a range extension for, and you probably even see them now occasionally on certain parts of the road around here. That's a picture of a flying squirrel that we got at Kings Mountain. It's very rare to see them in the daylight, but what happened was Kings Mountain was doing one of their prescribed burns, and this flushed out a flying squirrel from its nest cavity. So they got this picture of it. Beavers. A lot of beavers, they're considered nuisance animals in the state of South Carolina, second only to deer, but they're very common now. And again, you don't have to see the actual beaver, although that picture there was one that I took at Kings Mountain. I went right up to the edge of Kings Creek, and this little guy's just swimming all around, and he didn't seem to be bothered by me at all. I've never known a beaver to let you get that close to them. But all I did was take pictures and then back off. You can also use their footprints, and you can also tell when they've been gnawing on trees in an area. So there's plenty of ways to detect beaver by their sign. The mice and rats, these are all of the species that were documented during the survey. So there's a lot of those, including two non-native species, the Norway or brown rat and the black rat, and then of course the house mouse. All of those were introduced from European settlers, from the early ships that came over. So there's actually 3 non-native invasive species of rats and mice. This little guy, not common, but is here, the so-called meadow jumping mouse. And what I want you to note is the length of the tail. That's the tail that's curving all the way around there. The reason I bring it up is that the Sherman traps I showed you earlier, actually a biologist redesigned them to capture jumping mice. Because what would happen is a lot of times when the mice would go into a regular sized Sherman trap and the door would shut, it would shut on the tail and clip the tail off because the tail is so long. So he actually modified a Sherman trap and made them like twice as long so that the animals could go in and, you know. So in areas where they're common, they would actually use those extended size Sherman traps to catch them without hurting them. These are guys that were documented mainly by roadkills, the coyote, the red fox, and the gray fox. And these are specimens in my collection And that's why we've got them in the collection, because they were roadkills. Not like we went out and killed these things, but unfortunately these were roadkills. So we got gray fox and red fox and coyote for that matter. Black bears are not native to the Piedmont, but there are occasions when they come through the Piedmont, come down out of the mountains. And there's actually some populations on the coastal plain too, in the lower elevations, swampy areas. But I know in the last 20 years, there have been times when black bears would come down out of the mountains. They've been photographed and documented in Rock Hill, South Carolina, and downtown York, South Carolina. The only evidence I ever found was from this transient individual in Southern York County in 1995. This was bear sign here because what black bears will do to mark territory, a male will stand up on his hind legs and reach above his head and make scratch marks in the tree, and sometimes he'll turn around and even bite in the tree. That's a visual indicator to rival bears of his size, and sometimes because a lot of carnivores have interdigital scent glands, when he would make that scratch, he would leave a scent mark in. And then, of course, they leave, you know, the scat behind too, and that's pretty distinct. Raccoons, again, we know they're here, but these are the first official records for the northern Piedmont of South Carolina. These very human-looking handprints, both in the mud and in those chalk areas I was telling you about earlier. And also skeletal remains. Like I said, if you find a skull or anything with teeth, especially, this is from a raccoon jawbone here, you can document and tell pretty readily what the mammal is. They're pretty distinctive to identify. Some of the less encountered ones include the members of the weasel family, and we do have long-tailed weasels and mink in the area. This specimen here was a roadkill. I have never seen a live mink in my entire lifetime. They're going to be very nocturnal, very shy, very secretive. Same with weasels. I remember getting a call from a lady about 20 years ago, because back then, people didn't get on the internet. People called people who thought I was supposed to come deal with their wildlife issues they got in the house. And this lady was just frantic because what she said was, I've got a furry snake in my house. Have you ever seen a weasel? I mean, they're very long, very slender, and they move in a very serpentine fashion very quickly. I didn't know what she was talking about. And she was so uptight that I am close by that I finally figured out, oh, she must be talking about a weasel. I was doing this research, so I took a have-a-heart trap to her house, and I said, where is it? She goes, it's locked in that room right there. I said, locked? She said, well, I'm not opening that door. You can if you want to. Well, as I suspected, it's in the broad, in the middle of the day. That thing had gone into a corner under a bed, something. So I took a little can of cat food with the have-a-heart trap, set it in there, and I said, we're going to leave this overnight, and tomorrow morning you call me if anything's in there. Sure enough, she called me, and it was a long-tailed weasel. I mean, little teeny guy. But they think they're 50 feet tall. I walked in to pick up that trap, and that little guy was like, if I get out of this cage, I'm going to eat you alive. I mean, he was just voracious and hissing and just showing his teeth. And I'm like, I could step on you, but he was just, and so I thought, okay, I gotta go take this guy away from her house and release it into the woods. And he's hissing and fussing the whole way. So I went and got to the edge of the woods and just opened up the end of the have-a-heart trap, and it just vanished in thin air. It was just gone. Never to be seen again by me. Just incredible little animals, but that's the only experience I've ever had with a live weasel. Skunks, which used to be classified in the weasel family, now they put them in their own family. There's a reason why you're not seeing a picture of a specimen or one in a trap or anything, because I don't pick up skunks. I don't pick up dead skunks. We've got them. I have a few specimens in the collection at the museum, but it's because somebody else had them at a museum and gave them to me. I'm just not going to mess with skunks. I'm not. Everybody has their limitations. Everybody has their boundaries. Skunks are mine. The bobcat, again, these are the same pictures you saw earlier, documented by footprints, but they are here. Probably more common than you realize. Everybody knows white-tailed deer here, so I've got some pictures. footprints, things like that. So what's the significance of all this? We got range extensions for the woodchuck and the marsh rice rat in this. 4 of the species that we documented are of special state concern in South Carolina. And South Carolina ranks 15th in the United States for overall species richness. And I told you early on that I did a study all across the museums all across the country. How many of those, I looked at, I found 2,345 records of mammals in museum collections across the country in the Carolinas, in South Carolina, but only 371 of those were from the Piedmont of South Carolina. So a little over 15% of the mammal species in museums across the country actually came to Piedmont. So that's a very small amount. So I'm saying work like this, the baseline data is very important to be able to document. Even if it's stuff people see every day, the official records were not there. And now they are, now they're published, and I feel better about that. And in fact, I've since done something similar for amphibians that was published in 2019 in the same journal. But these are all the people that I owe special thanks, worked with me, and helped with all those projects over those 20 years. And that's the end of my story. Thank you very much.